Welcome to the Healthcare Intelligence Podcast. Today we have Terry Bohlke. He has been with ASC for over a few decades and most recently at Community Health Systems. We'd love to have him share a little bit more about not only the finance side, but the operation side of ASC today. So welcome to the show, Terry.
Thank you, Charlene. I appreciate the invitation. It's great to talk to you again.
Yeah, and I think to just kick us off, I would love to hear more about how your background has shaped the way you lead ASC. I know you came from a more finance background, so we'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, a bit of a different background than most people have coming from ASCs. But I do find that people in ASCs come from all walks of life. I was a CPA and heavily into finance. I was the chief financial officer for a couple of hospitals in California, and the doctors asked me to come run their surgery center they had just built. Didn't really know much of anything about surgery centers, but that's the way I got into it. I had a director of nursing named Chona who was wonderful, and she just took me by the arm and taught me everything that I needed to know as an administrator about the clinical side of ASCs and the regulatory and compliance as well. So been with two different ASC management companies, and then also most recently with the health system. And there I was vice president of ASCs, ran everything A to Z. From the finance side to operations to acquisitions and development, did it all, and was there for 10 years. I was also the president of the National ASC Association, ASCA, and also the president of the California ASC Association, CASA. But for about 20 years, my responsibilities have been nationwide, and I've had ASCs from Alaska to Key West and in between.
I'm sure you see a lot of different flavors of ASC throughout that. And I think to dive us into the challenges you have seen in ASC so far, and we know that it's not as like the tech stack, the operation is a little different from other pockets of healthcare. So we'd love to hear more about the frictions that you have seen, throughout ASC.
Yeah, a lot of things going on in the ASC world. And like you say, running an ASC is completely different from running a hospital, which I've done. It's also very, very different, but probably similar to a physician practice in that the details matter a lot more in ASCs than they do at a hospital, similar to practices and other areas like that. A lot of growth, a lot of great things going on. As you know, just so many more procedures are moving to the ASC environment, both from the hospital environment and from the practice environment. So we're seeing a lot of that, a lot of growth, as I mentioned, in the number of procedures being done, the types of procedures being done, higher acuity, and also the number of ASCs are growing all the time.
We see a lot of cardiovascular codes coming in place, right? So that's one of the hot area. We'd love to hear more about what specialties you see that's growing rapidly in the space too.
Yeah, cardiovascular definitely. Possibly the fastest growing, partially because there's not a lot of cardiology being done in ASCs right now compared to what could be done. So that is definitely growing rapidly. The number of procedures that have been approved have outpaced any other specialty in the last few years. That's really doing a lot for that. So we're seeing a lot more cardiologists and cardiovascular surgeons and interventional radiologists getting involved in pushing those specialties to the ASC. Again, still total joints, still very big, and spine very big. A lot of growth opportunity there. Most of those procedures are still being done in hospitals when most really could be done in ASCs. So that's huge growth. I've seen private equity driving a lot of the growth as well. And those are in areas like spine and orthopedics, of course, but also like additional areas like urology, for example. Urologists in private equity companies are finding that they can actually do a lot better, and the patient will be a lot safer doing their office cases in the ASC setting. So we're seeing a lot of that as well. And the bread and butter specialties that have always been good in ASCs are still very good, like ENT and GI and ophthalmology, all very good cases for ASCs.
Yeah, and I think we talked about how ASC by nature is almost a value-based arrangement, just like the cost, even with all the supplies rising and anesthesia rising, is still comparatively cheaper than a hospital.
Yeah, you're right. And it's so I get asked all the time about value-based care and ASCs, and we were value-based care before anyone had heard the term value-based care, because we are honestly we're clearly lower cost, but also as far as the triple aim goes, the lower cost and the access. I mean, there are way many more ASCs than there are hospitals, so we have significantly improved access and quality. The quality is just fantastic. And you ask most patients where they would rather go. They would rather go have surgery in an ASC. And when you look at the patient satisfaction for an ASC versus patient satisfaction in other surgical options, ASCs are just head and shoulder above.
And since you talked about the capital influence, the private equity influence, I thought it may be interesting to touch upon a topic, which is what does it take to start a new ASC? I think there's a lot of interest. Some folks really enjoy it. Some folks found it, do it once and never again. So we'd love to hear more about how you would approach it.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so if you're going to build a new ASC, the cost to build an ASC has doubled post pandemic. And I can't say why. It makes no sense. I've talked to many architects who do a lot of ASCs, and they've experienced the same thing. But it just costs so much more to build one, and it's not just the cost of the actual building and materials and equipment, but it's also the time is just significantly increased. The time to get ready, to get licensed, eventually get accredited. And then once you get through all that process, then you've got to wait for the Medicare PTAN number before you can get almost all the Medicare, almost all the commercial insurance payers to sign a contract with you. Some of them won't even talk to you until you get that. So you can't even negotiate rates in advance. And then, of course, add on to that, if you're in a certificate of need stage, you could easily add a year or more if it's contested. So it's a big time frame. A lot of private equities don't have that kind of patience. Some do, but I would just, for any private equity listeners, I would just say, if you're going to get into the ASC game and you're going to do de novos, which is a great way to go, then you just have to have patience. And of course, the other ways is through acquisitions of existing ASCs, but that can get tricky because you're buying into ASCs of typically already 100% physician-owned ASCs. There aren't that many left. There are some, but everybody knows who they are, and all the companies are going after the same ASC. So you end up sometimes overpaying. And a lot of times the doctors will get that money and they'll slow down, and suddenly you're not seeing the results of your investment. Not always. I think the right strategy is a combination of acquisitions and de novos or new builds.
I think one thing we hear is like even for it's really very competitive to do acquisition. We are seeing a lot of 10x multiples. And then also for the new the de novo sites, it does take sometimes 2 years minimum start to finish, right? To get things identified, credentialed correctly, and having the first case start operating there.
Yeah, it's because, and you got to realize too at the beginning, whoever you're working with, and it's typically a group of doctors, and they all have different ways of wanting to do things. There's no real boilerplate operating agreement. I mean, there is. We always joke in the industry saying, somebody wrote this operating agreement 20 years ago and we're all using the same one. But there's so many variations of it and so many things that really matter to the doctors. And if you want to get a deal done with them, you're going to have to be flexible. You're going to have to be able to write the agreement that they're comfortable with. And that's anything from voting rights to retirement language and adverse events. And then what happens if there's an adverse event? Just who makes what decisions, just on and on and on, things that have to be negotiated. And to your question, that takes time. It easily takes 6 months. Sometimes can take a year. Sometimes your work. I recently did one where it took 3 years. It took 3 years and a lot of patience and just a lot of going back and modifying different language with a moving target. But it got done. And again, not a lot of companies have that kind of patience to do that kind of work.
And on the flip side, let's say we have the ASC open, just running, there's cases coming in. The question then comes to cash flow collection, the back office side. What have you seen things working? Either with the in-source offshore model or today with technology?
Yeah, there are very limited number of systems from a technology standpoint that actually work in an ASC. There are really just a limited number of, as far as systems go, that are used in an ASC. And there's really just a handful. There's, HST and SIS and some others that do like basically the practice management system and the EMR. And then there's some other really good patient communication and patient engagement software. There's some great billing software out there. There's a lot of options for billing. Third-party billing is very good as well, but they use the same systems. And so the one thing they're not is there's not a lot of AI utilization in these systems, and they're not really made to do that. So it'll be interesting to see how AI plays out in the centers and in ASCs. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but not a lot there now. I'm not sure if that gets to the crux of.
Yeah, I think we talked about how a lot of I think one thing we look at is like aging AR, right? If it's above 90 days, like that number should be cleaned up as soon as possible. And then on a steady state, how can we make sure the claims are clean? On the clinical side, I think we talked about GI Genius and different ways of like sterilization, instrument, surgery camera, capturing what's happening in the operating room. But I think it all comes back to like now that we have all the data captured, how can we build intelligence on top of that? So we can actually deliver OR efficiency, the net collection, the cash flow that makes the practice profitable.
Yeah, and I think you're going to see new systems come about that do those kinds of things that really are able to capture the workflows of the operating room and outside the operating room as well. And like you mentioned, the business office, and be able to utilize AI to review that data, whether it be just hardcore numbers, or whether it be video, or just other ways to track the process, and then to look at that and within minutes now develop a different process that significantly saves footsteps and saves sterilization of instruments, and helps better track people and helps better track instrumentation to really identify improvements of the process. And what that results in is, you would need less equipment, fewer supplies, and probably, better utilization of staff as well. And all of that results in savings for ASCs and great opportunities for anybody who's able to do that.
And one thing we talked about that stood out to me is like the ASC finance you talked about, how a lot of that essentially we build the fixed costs and then there's a lot to build on top of it. Do you want to share more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people don't understand this about ASCs, and including physicians who are owners in ASCs. This is important for them to know that ASCs are almost all fixed costs. You spend the vast majority of your dollars, your investment dollars, and your whatever you borrowed from the bank, just is spent before you see one patient. And so if you get that in mind, you realize that what's key is the volume, because you've now spent the money. And it's, as far as how profitable you want it to be, is how efficient you can get your patients very safely and in a quality way through your ASC. And so that's a lot of it. Every case you do, with very, very few exceptions, is extremely profitable as far as contributing toward those fixed costs, because that's where all it is. And when you take that to the next step, it is, once your ASC is break even, meaning it's covering its fixed costs, every case after that is monumentally more profitable. And a lot of ASCs will get to that point where they're just marginally profitable. And it's almost like everybody just coasts on that and rests on that, when that's the time to really pump it up and pump up the volume and, recruit additional physicians, get them in there, because that's where you're going to turn a good ASC into a great performing ASC.
Do you know why people like it sounds like it takes a while to build out to get to that steady state, right? Like, what are some reasons why people don't pump the gas and just go all in once they have that in place?
Well, if you and I were owners in ASCs and we had the ability to do that, we would do that without question. But not all physicians work that way. A lot of them do. A lot of them totally get that, and they're usually the main drivers at the ASC. And if you have, let's say you have 15 or 20 doctors who are partners in an ASC, and 5 of them get that, and 5 of them are really cranking it out and getting the thing to where it's profitable. And the other partners are like, eh, I'll do, I'll commit Tuesday mornings, and every Tuesday mornings, whatever my scheduler books, I'll book there. But the other days that I do surgery, I'll do them at this hospital, or I'll do them over here, and I'll pretty much let my scheduler in my office determine where I go. And that's not what those other 5 are doing. The 5 who get it are saying, no, I will see this. These cases will always go to my surgery center. Well, but doctor, that's going to make it very inconvenient for you on Thursdays because you have to be here and you got to be back at the office. They say, then make it work, but you're going to put these patients at my surgery center because that's what you and I would do, right? If we had ownership in a surgery center, that's just what we would do. And that's what the really committed ones do. And the challenge of being an ASC administrator and an ASC operator is getting the others to do that exact same thing, to direct their schedulers and control their schedule and get any cases that are appropriate for an ASC and have them done at their ASC.
The case selection is really important. I talk to a lot of ASC surgeons, and they do like if the patient's condition is truly very complex, it will be in the hospital. But most of the other ones will be at their ASC. That's where it's really better, faster for all the alignment here, right? We talked about physician alignment, patient outcome, and also the payer sees better quality for what they invest in.
Yeah, and most definitely, there are a lot of cases that need to be done at hospitals. And as much as I love ASCs, I equally know this country needs hospitals, and hospitals perform so many important tasks and services for everybody. And a lot of things like burn units that don't typically make hospitals money, and other things like that, but they do it because they're all service, and thank God they do. And they serve a lot of the under insured population and uninsured population. And once again, thank God they do. They keep the emergency rooms open. There's a very vital role for hospitals. So, and there's, for that same reason, there are a lot of patients that simply should not be done in ASCs. And surgeons know this, and that's certainly not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the doctors who simply for their own personal convenience do cases at hospitals and do cases at other places that maybe they don't have an investment in. So you really, any of us, most of us would support our investment. I mean, I can't imagine like someone who had a bakery, because if you have an investment in a surgery center, you are an owner of a small business, and an owner of a bakery isn't going to go hang out at another bakery. They're just not going to do that. They're not going to tell other people, hey, you should try that other bakery across town. They're going to say, no, my bakery's the best. And if it's not the best, I'm going to make it the best. And it's the same thing. And so that's a lot of it is, just a long way of answering your question of, why don't they put their foot on the gas? It's just a lot of either personal reasons, or they just, they don't want to upset the hospital or things like that.
This gets to a point where I want to it's a final question I want to leave, because I think this is something we hear a lot from the audience, which is how do you drive physician alignment? As it's pretty critical part for them to send the cases over, but also to make it the best, right? So how would you approach that in ASC?
Yeah, it's a lot of it is making sure that, well, first of all, paramount to anything, quality of care and patient safety. Absolutely, all the way. That is paramount to everything. And in any healthcare facility, if you do that, the rest will follow. But you just have got to be the best at patient safety. You've got to be the best at patient quality. And the doctors need to know that, because that's first and foremost, their concern is the patient. their patient. And we need to match that at the ASC, and we need to exceed their expectations on that. And once you have that covered, then it's a matter of more helping to understand what their needs are. And for every physician, every surgeon, it's going to be different. And they may have growth strategies. They may have personal things that they need. They may need to start at 6 a.m. because they need to go pick up kids from school. It could be something like that. But understanding those physician needs is very key. And then keeping that partnership mentality. And the last thing you want to do is make them feel like they're not getting information, they're not being communicated with, things like that. So communication is key, not just with the physician partners, but all the physicians who operate there, their offices, the staff. So everybody's on the same sheet of music. So that's critical. And then finally, I would just say leadership of the ASC is very important. And I've spent a career of just mentoring healthcare leaders. I was formerly in the Navy. I was a commander, and I was my last command was executive officer of the Navy Center for Naval Leadership, where we trained hundreds of sailors and officers to be just better leaders. And so I've carried that tradition into healthcare and into the ASC world. And I just know that mentoring those leaders and teaching them how to be strong leaders and good leaders, and how to mentor their people, how to treat people right, and create an environment that people want to be at by being a leader that people want to follow makes a big difference. And that includes the doctors.
Yeah, and I think that's usually model by example. The same lesson rings through everywhere, and especially in ASC, where I think it's a great place to be. I think it's a bright spot in healthcare and where we see a lot of future moving into.
It definitely is.
Awesome. Well, Terry, thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to catch up again.
Thank you, Charlene. Great to talk to you again. Take care.